Well, there's been talk around some sort of new Nintendo Switch for years now. I think since like the Switch came out, there were talks about some sort of new Nintendo Switch or Switch Pro, one that would enhance the games and kind of the experiences that we have with things like resolution and frame rate. Eventually, we got that Switch Lite, which went in the opposite direction. It was cheaper and it was just a handheld. But today, we got an announcement for a new addition to the Switch family. The only thing is, it's not necessarily the Switch Pro that a lot of people were hoping for and even expecting after several reports. And while reports from Bloomberg got a couple things right, they also got a few things wrong. And we're going to go over all that here today. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So tomorrow in Newswave, I'll go through more of the straightforward details that Nintendo laid out for us. I kind of wanted to go over some of the features, some smaller things I noticed here, and a little bit of speculation thrown in there for fun. So let's jump over to Nintendo's official website for this, where it says Nintendo Switch, parentheses, OLED model. They got very creative with the title, obviously. Now, looking at this, I think this is a replacement for the current Switch. The $300 Switch will probably be slowly phased out over the next year, and this will, for the most part, just kind of slot in as the default Switch, the hybrid model that most people pick up in stores. It's coming out October 8th, same day as Metroid Dread, and hey, gotta give Nintendo credit. They want Sean to play Balan Wonderworld as much as the rest of us. They showcased Metroid as being played on this OLED model, so I'm sure a ton of people will at least see that. And it's coming out at $350, so $50 more than the current Switch. And I think that's also something Nintendo wanted to do, is push the price up slightly, and having something like an OLED display will give it more of a premium feel, so it might be more justified in people's minds that they would pay $50 more for this. They've also changed out the dock, which you can see here. It's a little more curved. Once again, looks a little more premium. And they also have kind of this new color scheme here, this white color scheme that they have with the dock and the Joy-Cons here being showcased. Now, if we scroll down, they do have like a trailer here you can check out, but they also laid out several of the details here we can go over, which includes a 7-inch OLED screen. It fills up the bezels pretty well. That was something that was always pointed at, like, wow, look at that. The bezels are so noticeable around this 6.2-inch screen, and seriously, just going from 6.2-inch up to 7-inch was enough to fill out those bezels, and I do think it looks a lot better. It's not quite edge to edge with its display, but it's certainly better than those large bezels we've been dealing with for several years now. They also updated the Kickstand, and this is something that was rumored, which we're going to look at one rumor here and leaks, I guess, that came out, because they were like shockingly correct. And there was one thing they also pointed out, but the wide adjustable stand was one of them. This is kind of like what we see in like a Surface tablet. It has several different angles. You can see here where we had the Kickstand now, right? And it's functional, but like barely functional. Basically, if you set it up and you don't touch it, it's probably okay, as long as there's not like a strong gust of wind that comes through. This looks way sturdier, and there are also several angles. The original, well, the Kickstand now, the original one, has one angle. So that is a legitimate improvement for tabletop mode, especially if you're someone who's like on break at work or something, and you do set up your Switch on a table and you want to play with the Joy-Cons off. This is probably an amazing feature that you're looking at right now. But there was something else that I thought was really funny, because this was something else that was rumored, and I had not a hard time, but a harder time believing this, because Nintendo has never done this in the system, and I know it seems weird because we take it for granted on every other system we pretty much have, and that is a built-in wired LAN port, which we can see here. Also notice they appear to have added some extra vents for, I guess, just airflow on the Switch when it's sitting in the dock, which is interesting because, to my understanding, Mariko, which is the chip being used in here, same chip that we have in the current Redbox Switch, runs cooler, and that's why we get better battery life out of it. It doesn't draw as much power, obviously, but it's interesting that they decided now was the time to put in a vent for the Switch dock. And I want to come back to this here in a bit with that leak, because there's something very interesting about this dock that I think could end up leading to, I know, another Switch revision at some point. But 64 gigabytes of onboard storage, great. It's still not like a ton of space, but it's twice what we're dealing with now. So it's at least good to have some sort of upgrade in the storage department, as we are getting games that do need larger updates and just need game data downloads to go alongside of the cartridge even. And enhanced audio, they didn't really explain too much about it. Just enjoy enhanced audio from the system's onboard speakers based on kind of the specs that they outlined in their chart when they put it next to the Switch we have now. There's not much difference. This one weighs a bit more, and even down to the audio itself looks exactly the same. This could legitimately just be larger speakers. It's very possible that's all it is. And then they go over some of the different things, 3 modes in one, of course, TV mode, tabletop, handheld mode. And we do have 2 different bundles you can get at $350, which includes the white set and then just the standard neon red, neon blue set with the black dock. So there are 2 different dock variations to pick up. Now, seeing a lot of people react to this online, there's a lot of disappointment because, let's face it, the revision here is underwhelming based on the reports that we were hearing out of Bloomberg. But even without those reports, I feel like people would look at this and be like, this is another push towards it being more of a handheld device than a docked device. I mean, we saw the Switch Lite, right? That came out and it was like, okay, that's cheaper. That makes sense. It's a way for them to have an entry point into the Switch family that eliminates the dock itself. Yeah, it's weird because it's a Switch that doesn't switch, but it's Nintendo. What are you going to do? But this is a more expensive device at $350. Yes, it has the OLED screen, but there's not a lot of benefit if you're someone who just plays docked. In fact, if that is you and your Switch never leaves the dock, I don't know why you would buy this at all. Like, the $300 hybrid model makes a lot more sense for you still. Like I said, I think they will eliminate that model, but that's one of the biggest things here is Nintendo hasn't, at least as of now, announced anything when it comes to improving that docked experience. Now, the more interesting part around this announcement, actually, for me, has to do with the dock itself. I know OLED is cool. It's going to make the handheld experience better. Trust me, I have a Vita, like the original Vita system. OLED is a significantly better experience, I feel, than the LCD. But when I look at this dock here, there's a few things that stick out to me. The first one being they did eliminate one of the USB ports, and that is on the back here. They replaced it with that LAN port, which, again, surprising for Nintendo because they've never done that before. The extra ventilation is something that I'm sure will be talked about, but Nintendo could have taken into account some of the complaints and talks about maybe the Switch getting hotter in the dock, and they're like, well, we can actually use less plastic and give it better airflow, so why not? We'll just go ahead and throw that in when we mold the plastic. But if we were ever going to get to a point where there was a 4K Switch, the dock was going to have to change. And if Nintendo kind of introduces this replacement Switch now, there's a way for them to start cycling this new dock in. The biggest issue we've had with the dock currently and the rumors around a 4K Switch, something that didn't sit even with me as well as more I looked into it and heard about it, is that the current dock has like HDMI 1.4, and that would present issues when it comes to doing 4K on your TV or your monitor because the bandwidth just isn't there for that. So at some point, Nintendo was going to have to revise the dock, and we don't know at this time, but it's a possibility, I'll say, that this dock could have HDMI 2.0, for example, and that would allow Nintendo to target 4K with something like a new Nintendo Switch down the road. I don't think Nintendo's closing up shop after 2021, and I also don't think this is the last Switch revision that they are going to unveil or release. So I'm kind of thinking bigger picture here, even beyond this system. But I will say this is probably the only Switch revision that's coming out this year. I don't think Nintendo has some, ace up their sleeve or something to be like next week, oh, guess what? We're also having this new Nintendo Switch Pro or something. No, that's probably still off in the distance. I think looking at the Switch now, I'm becoming more and more confident that this very well could be an 8 to 10 year cycle for this platform, this family of systems. I think Nintendo realizes they can keep this thing going for a while if they continue to refresh the hardware every few years. I mean, if you think about it, we had the Nintendo Switch release 2017. Then we had the Switch Lite in 2019. And now we're getting this Nintendo Switch OLED model in 2021. So it's possible that in another 2 years we get another Switch, then so on. It just keeps refreshing and reiterating on the hardware to keep it relevant as we go through this, I would say, longer than usual generation. But I still think we have to point out that Bloomberg did mention enhanced gameplay, visuals, 4K. Those were all things they had talked about alongside of OLED. So they were correct with the OLED display down to it being 7 inches and them maybe trying to show it off as more of a premium device. I do look at this and see it as more premium than the current Switch, but it looks like it's using the same Tegra chipset, the Morrico chip, and it does look like it's not going to be doing anything when it comes to 4K, at least for now. Like, let's say that dock has a newer HDMI port. The X1 could already do 4K to some degree, like streaming Netflix or something, or Hulu, I guess. So sure, they could update that down the road. Basically, I don't see this doing anything when it comes to 4K games at all. But while I did point out Bloomberg having the 4K thing incorrect, there were some other leaks that came out from manufacturers and in the factories, it appears, where they named every single thing that was shown there, but they still mentioned 4K TV output. For example, this was one that was shared that says a 7-inch OLED screen, pretty much the same size, so almost no bezels. The current Joy-Con's compatible. A Surface-style flap for tabletop gaming. That's something we had gone over before. Micro SD slot behind this flap on the back. That makes sense considering it's like the whole bottom of it. A slightly thicker dock with 2 USB 3 ports and an Ethernet port. They even point out that one of those USB ports was going to be eliminated. So we'd only have 2 instead of 3, and the Ethernet port would replace it. And then they go on to mention 4K TV output. So it's not just Bloomberg who had mentioned 4K, which makes me believe, sure, somewhere in Nintendo's Willy Wonka factory of an R&D sector, they are working on 4K output for a future Switch. I don't really doubt that. I think it becomes more difficult when reports come out trying to predict when it's actually going to come to market. So while I'm happy that we're getting an OLED screen in this Switch, I do wish there was a bit more to it when it comes to the performance side of things, because I think now most of us are sold on the idea of the Switch with its hybrid nature. It has some awesome games, but some of those games do suffer from performance issues. Think of like Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity. That's one that always gets pointed out. But I think a lot of people are also now looking around saying, well, Breath of the Wild 2's out next year. I'd like that to run really, really well on a Switch. So we're also looking towards these future games that could heavily benefit from newer hardware. And like I said, I don't think we're done seeing Switch revisions. It's not happening this year. All right. So I guess there's always next year. Isn't that what they say with these Switch Pro rumors? So there you go. Look forward, I'm sure, to a whole bunch of reports coming out. We'll see if Bloomberg follows up with their last one. And that means, I guess, another year or so, at least, of YouTube videos. So that'll be fun. But let me know what you guys think about the Nintendo Switch OLED model that was revealed today by Nintendo. And also let me know if you're picking it up. Obviously, I'll be picking it up and we'll do a teardown of it. But I will be keeping an eye out for some of those FCC filings, because they'll take images of the inside of the Switch. They'll take images of the inside of the dock. And that could give us a bit of an insight as to what Nintendo is doing here with this system internally. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.